All right, so I will, oh cool, Chris just joined us, awesome. So we have all three of us. I'm gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order. We'll let the minutes reflect that all board members are present. My name is Robert Cullen, I'm president of the board. And for those of you, a couple announcements at the beginning. For those of you who are, well, on Zoom, you would just click the raise hand button to speak. And then anyone who's dialed in by phone, then you would do *9 to raise your hand. And then when called upon, then you would do *6 to unmute yourself. So it's *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. Otherwise, you can also submit, I guess the comments needed to be sent by 2 o'clock if they were going to be emailed. So I think I'm reading that right.
Right.
Okay. And I'll make that announcement a couple more times for anyone that's listening in on the phone about *9 to raise your hand, and then when you're called upon, *6 to unmute yourself. With that being said, then I think that's the only housekeeping stuff that we need to do. So let's go to the general manager comments, please.
I don't have any comments for today. Most of the items I have to comment on are included in the agenda today.
Okay. I want to check really quick. I see Patricia has her hand up. And I'm not sure if that's because she wants to say something now or is letting us know that she's here.
She sent a message saying she was here, and I'd let her know we'll let her on that as soon as the item comes on.
Yeah. So yeah, Patricia, we will let you in once we get to that agenda item. Okay. So I think instead of going down the department manager list, are there any department managers that would like to make a comment today?
This is Mandy Brooks, Resource Recovery Manager, and just wanted to remind Executive Committee and anyone else that's listening that we have Tire Amnesty event is happening in October. It started today and it'll run through the end of October 31st. And if you can hear the background noise, that is my dog going crazy at the door. So just a reminder, it's happening at all of our facilities, Sun Street, Johnson, and Halone Road. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
And your dog agrees. I think your dog has some tires.
It's very upset right now. Sorry.
It's because you're giving us attention. Yeah, Ray, you got something for us?
I have a couple items. One, with the audit being completed this month, we'll be bringing forth the reserve allocation next month. We're looking at possibly doing something different, but we're working out the numbers internally. We're looking at possibly recommending starting to pre-fund the Johnson Canyon post-closure, since in theory there won't be a landfill to produce revenues when that comes around. And also to fully fund the operational reserve, just to make sure that that's fully funded in case we do need to dip into it. So we do have $3.8 million to work with. So we'll be working through those internally and bringing it back to the EC and the board in November.
Okay.
And also, we switched workers' comp carriers at the beginning of the fiscal year back to our old carrier, State Fund Insurance, and they have granted us $10,000 for COVID-19 safety expenditures. So for our purposes, we're going to treat it as a grant, just to make sure that we track those expenditures, ensure that we're spending it on what they intended us to. And with the EC's permission, I'm gonna bring that directly to the board in 2 weeks. We received a check late last week, not in time to get an item into EC. So that we can get that allocated and approved and start tracking those expenditures. We've already spent some money, so I want to make sure that that's in there before we get there.
I'm assuming that's primarily designed for PPE.
It is actually Caesar's the one that applied for it, but it is meant for personal protective, disinfectant, and just to minimize the risk of COVID-19 to the employees.
Okay. Was that all, Ray?
That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Talking enough in a minute.
Caesar, how is like the ordering of PPE, are you able to get what your employees need?
We are. I think the one thing that's a little hard to get right now is the wipes, disinfectant wipes. But we've got other stuff. We've got cloth wipes that you add the disinfectant solution to once you make the right solution. So we're making do. We're getting by. We're making our own PPE by going a little harder route. It's not the convenient, pull the wipies out of the little container, but we do have packages of cloth wipes that are dry, and then we just put the disinfectant solution in there and then use them to wipe down the equipment that way. And then we also have a liquid that we put in reusable spray bottles as well, and then give the guys terry cloths, and then they'll do it that way as well if we needed to. So it's not as bad now as it was in probably March through about July. It was very hard to get any kind of PPE. We're probably 4 to 6 weeks out, but it's a little bit more available right now. We're finding off-brand wipes, off-brand hand sanitizer, and then bleach from our janitorial supply company as well, because we use bleach watered down and diluted to sanitize the facilities, common areas that public would enter and touch.
Good, okay, great. Any other updates for us? And okay, so I guess we're done with the department manager comments. Let's go to committee member comments now, and we'll start with Vice President De La Rosa, please.
No, I have none.
Okay.
At this time.
Okay, alternate Vice President Lopez, got anything for us?
Let's see if it works. My audio's been on and off today. So can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Perfect. I just want to thank staff once again today. There was a lot of action on social media regarding Gloria Road and the progress that we've made. And there's a lot of residents that live up that road that have been sending thank yous. And so when those happen, I've been sure to include the city of Gonzales and the Solid Waste Authority as partners and making sure everybody gets the appropriate credit. But I know we're coming hopefully to the end of that project soon. But I want you to know the residents out there are extremely appreciative. They feel so much safer because that project is to the phase that it's in now. And I just wanted, on behalf of the community I represent, to say thank you. Thank you for helping make their lives a little better. That's all I've got today. Thank you.
Awesome. And I bet you could use those positive comments right now, Chris.
They're definitely helpful.
Yeah. Okay, and I think all of my comments relate to agenda items, so I'll hold off on those comments. So at this point in time, we are on public comment. If you are listening in, if you've dialed in, if you would like to make a public comment on an item that's not on the agenda, you would do so by doing *9, and that indicates that you have raised your hand. So if you're on the phone and wish to make a public comment on an item not on the agenda, please hit *9 now. And I'll pause for just a second. And hearing none, then we will go down to the consideration items, where we have item number 1, which is the minutes of the September 3rd, 2020 meeting. And any committee discussion on the minutes?
None.
Okay.
None from me.
Public
None.
comment, same thing goes. You would do *9 to raise your hand. And seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee for action, please.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a first with Lopez, a second with De La Rosa. And does anyone object? Hearing none, motion carries. We'll go to item number 2, which is the August 2020 claims and financial reports. And we're going to receive a report from Ray Hendricks, Finance and Administration Manager, please.
Can I get the next slide, Rosie? Or who's controlling it? Okay, so just a reminder, with us being a little more concerned about revenues, we are tracking our revenues a little differently this year and comparing to the budget. So for the month of August, our revenues were up compared to budget 170,000, and year to date we're at little over $500,000. So tipping fees are up 85,000, diverted materials are up 100,000 for August. So we're trending fairly well compared to budget. Next slide. And just a reminder of our cash balances. We do have $30 million in cash and investments at the end of August. This is a decrease of 1.5 million compared to July, but that's mainly due to the fact that we have the $2.4 million bond payment that we made, that we recorded at the beginning of August. So available for operations, we do always start as a deficit since we allocate the 2.5 million that we assign to CIPs, and post-closure, we move that cash out of the operations beginning of the year, and it does build up over time. Next slide. Okay, so revenues compared to last year, we are down $100,000 total revenues. But as I mentioned, we are still doing good to budget. We have always budgeted conservatively just to ensure that we are in a good position for the recession that was supposed to inevitably come. Didn't expect it to be the way it did, but it did come. Our expenditures are tracking fairly well. We did, next slide actually, we did put the C&D processing on hold just for the time being until we have a few months where we can reassess. So when we compare expenditures year over year, we're actually down about $60,000. And as I mentioned, 2.4 million in debt service payments that we made at the beginning of August. And that's it for me, unless there's any specific questions anyone would like me to address.
Okay, let's go to committee discussion first. Gloria or Chris, do you have any questions for Ray?
No, I don't have any at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, Ray.
I'm good at this point as well.
Okay, thank you. For members of the public, if you're listening in over the phone, please dial *9. And then Brian Fruss, I see that you joined us, so I know you're here for another agenda item, but if you have any comments or comments on this agenda item, you would just click the raise hand button. And I don't have any questions. And seeing no public comment, then the action would be to forward to the board and recommend approval. Can I get a motion to that effect, please?
So move.
Second.
First by Gloria and second by Chris. Let's on the rest of these, I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call vote just to make it a little bit more official, please. So if we could have a quick roll call vote, please.
Sure. Vice President De La Rosa,
Yes.
Alternate Vice President Lopez,
Yes.
and President Coleman.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you. Let's go to item number 3, the comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020. And we're going to hear from Ray first.
So people in the office have heard me say this, but I greatly enjoy working on the audit because it's black and white and there's no middle ground. There's no nothing. Numbers are what they are. It's just a matter of calculating and doing to them. Next slide. So let me start by thanking a host of people. October 1st is the absolute earliest we have ever delivered an audit. And it was done in a year where the accountant was working remotely and the auditors didn't have access to the office. So I really want to thank Sukdev and his team, as well as Ernesto and his team in the office. You know, Ernesto had to juggle a whole lot more than he normally does this time of year because I needed him to run around and grab stuff for me just because I wasn't there with immediate access. That and the auditors, because they weren't in the office, were asking for a lot more information than they normally do. So kudos to Ernesto and his team for managing And I've always said that, you know, the audit is a year-round thing, and if the accounting technicians aren't doing their job the way it needs to be done throughout the year, it makes life a whole lot harder at the end of the year. So the fact that we're able to deliver an audit on October 1st in a year of COVID with people working remotely, it is quite impressive. And I just really want to make sure that that's both the staff of the auditors and my staff in the office are recognized. That being said, next slide. Just like in years past, this is a comprehensive annual financial report. So it does include a statistical section, and it will be submitted to GFOA after the board meeting for review under the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting Program. And we also did not receive a management letter. And don't ask me how many years it has been, because I stopped counting a while ago. Next slide. We did implement a couple of new GSAs. Statement number 88, certain disclosures related to debt, including direct borrowing, direct placement, has absolutely no effect on our numbers. It just requires additional disclosures in the footnotes of, you know, what can lead to a default, can the bonds be called, and a couple other, you know, what are the basic terms and conditions. So we have to do some research to get that in. And then statement 95, which is the COVID-19 statement, in essence, delayed every other GSB that was due by a year. There's quite a few of them coming out, but the only one that's coming out in the next couple of years that probably affects us is one on leases. They have to be reported a little differently. And we don't have a ton of leases. We have a we have a lease in our admin office, and we lease out a courtyard in at Halone Road as well as some grazing land. So it shouldn't be too difficult for us to implement. And then they're doing some overhauls on the reporting, but those are years down the line. Next slide, please. All right, so financial highlights. I don't know if there's necessarily highlights because they're not as great as they have been. So revenue is up 78,000. Expenditures are up 1.2 million, and we'll talk about both of those, so there's a little bit more. And tonnage landfill, which is what pays the bills, decreased 1,400. We were in good track at March, but tonnage did decrease by the end of the year. Next slide, please. All right, so there are a lot of numbers here. So revenues are up 78,000, and it's mainly due to increases meant to support the new organics program, because most of the other revenues were actually down throughout the year. Operating expenditures were up 1.2 million. So we did add some staffing, as well as had to record some liabilities for leaves, as well as post-employment. There's a majority of that, plus some expenditures. Investment earnings started to taper down. It will probably continue to taper down as we get through this. Other non-operating revenues, last year was a insurance reimbursement for the fires that we have. Interest expenses 1.2 million. We didn't lose any money on anything. Well, we didn't write off any capital assets this year. And then capital contributions, which is the grants that we received last year for equipment and the organics, and this year for the organics. So all that being said, net position at the end of the year increased by 5.1 million. Next slide, please. All right, so just a condensed view of our assets and liabilities. Assets increased 3.3 million once you work that deferred inflow in. Liabilities decreased a little under 2 million. And that means the total net was increased at 5.1 million. And I was extremely surprised. I had a conversation with Brian, and this is not clear to someone that does not know accounting. So we're going to switch to the next slide. I'm going to kind of go through these numbers a little differently. Next slide, please. So Brian wanted me to explain this to someone who wasn't an accountant. So we're going to ignore assets and liabilities and kind of go through these numbers a little differently. So change in fixed assets. So that is money we spent on assets, less depreciation. The net amount of the increase this year was 2.5 million. So that is us completing the compost, building a new cell at the landfill, as well as some other equipment that was bought to facilitate to help run the sites. We paid down our debt, so that's $2.2 million. So our net change in investment in capital assets, which is a line in the audit, is 4.5 million. On top of that, we're working on pay-as-you-go. So we set aside 1.1 million for a new cell, which is now allocated to CIP. So the total net capital change is $5.6 million. So the other changes, so the net of cash, receivables, payables was $2 million. As I mentioned, 1.1 million of that is for a new cell. So it leaves about $800,000. Our closure and post-closure decrease our balance by $1 million. So that is an increase in liabilities. So that's $500,000 for Johnson Canyon, which we accrue yearly based on tonnage landfill, and then a $360,000 adjustment to Lewis Road. We record our closure and post-closure liabilities based on our pledge of revenue with Cal Recycle, and that is reviewed periodically. So this was, once it's approved by Cal Recycle, we adjust it accordingly. So Lewis was approved in the last fiscal year, so we did make that adjustment. Then you reduce another $200,000 for OPEB and pension, and like I said, that's the net of the assets and liabilities. And then another 200,000 in accrued leave. So a big chunk of that is the 80 hours that we were required to have on the books for COVID-19, as well as, you know, people can't go on vacations because they were stuck at home. So net change in position, $5.1 million. I showed this to Brian, he assured me that this made complete sense to him. So hoping it's a little easier to follow this way. Next slide. So last year we were at 12.3 million. You had 5 million. Our net position at the end of this fiscal year was 17.5 million. Next slide. So I've gone through this over the past, and we started with a super high net position, all paper assets, bunch of capital contributions at landfills that were closed, written off. And we took a bunch of debt to fix these landfills, and we sat in a negative deficit. And in 2014, we refunded our bonds, took the savings up front, started, you know, funding, paying off some of our liabilities, as well as nicely unexpected uptick in economic activity over the last 4 or 5 years. So you see it shot up, actually even faster than it dropped. So as we continue to pay down our debt and pay as you go and set aside funding, we will continue to improve the operations. So next slide. So that's my part of the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce Patricia Kaufman, who is the partner at McGilloway, Ray Brown & Kaufman, who has some required information that she has to give to the executive committee. So I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to her.
Good afternoon. How's my audio? Okay.
Yes.
I have to say, I love that last slide. That is my favorite slide of your presentation, Ray. Just seeing the turnaround that happened in such a, you know, controlled way. So it's a wonderful thing to see. As Ray mentioned, my name is Patricia Kaufman. I'm the audit partner for McGilloway, Ray Brown Kaufman. And with me today in the background, he's keeping his safe distance, is Sukdev Singh, and he was the senior manager on the audit. Next slide, please. So you've received our auditor communication letter, and this is just a recap of what it says. Basically, that management is responsible for the selection and use of appropriate accounting policies. Through the audit process, we do look at policies and compliance with appropriate policies and found no exceptions. We noted no transactions entered into by the authority for which there is a lack of authoritative guidance. All significant transactions are recorded in these financial statements, and these financial statements are what we call full accrual. I like that new kind of accounting format. I think we may need to present that maybe to GSAs and see if they want to change the financial presentation of the income and expense. But just to let you know, we are following GSAs statements, and because you are a JPA is an enterprise fund, all revenues and expenses are matched, right? So they're the full accrual basis within that period. There are some estimates, of course, in these financial statements. Some are pretty consistent, like depreciation and allowance for your receivables. They don't fluctuate very much. Some tend to be a little more volatile, so you're going to see fluctuations. For example, the pension liability and the other post-employment benefits, they're based on actuarial valuations, and those don't happen, you know, they're 2 years back, they are rolled forward. There's always multiple assumptions in these calculations, and as we all know, sometimes market conditions change, assumptions change. So you can see some volatility there. The closure and post-closure liability, that's based on engineering calculations. Again, that's something that you can see some changes in. That being said, we did evaluate the assumptions in these estimates, and we find them to be appropriate. Next slide, please. So as far as the footnotes, we do have some footnotes I want to call your attention to. Footnote 10 talks about the closure and post-closure requirements. Footnote 12 and footnote 13 talk about the pension plan. They're like significantly long footnotes, but it does give you some of the actuarial assumptions that are being used. And then the last footnote is footnote 15 that talks about commitments and contingencies. And this year we added a new section there to talk about COVID-19, not because it had a significant impact at this point, but to let the reader know that it could, right? Depending on what happens in the future next year with California economies and different laws and regulations, funding availabilities. So we're just sort of letting the reader know at this point, we haven't had a significant impact, but we really don't know the full impact of COVID-19. And I'm happy, very happy to report that we encountered no difficulties in working with management. We were able to perform the audit successfully, and as Ray mentioned, I think extremely efficiently. Based on the limitations that we had. And I do also want to commend, you know, Patrick and Ray and Ernesto and the rest of the, you know, financial team there that I know was a little bit of an added burden, but I think it went extremely efficiently. Timing of the audit went according to schedule. We didn't have delays. There were no disagreements. And that's basically what I am required to communicate in terms of the audit process. Next slide, please. So we have like one adjusting journal entry that's been recorded, was not significant, but management wanted to record it. We have no unrecorded adjusting journal entries. Sometimes there will be adjustments that we find during the audit, but they're not material, and so they pass on them. We didn't have any of those. What we found was recorded, and you should have a copy of that adjustment. Next slide, please. And as Ray mentioned, we do not have a management letter. We did not find any material deficiencies. in controls. I do need to add that the type of audit that we do is a financial statement audit. So we are giving an opinion on the financial statements. We are not giving an opinion on internal controls. It's a different type of audit, but we do look at the controls. And I want to emphasize that we did control testing as it relates to the financial statement. So we tested receipts and disbursements and payroll controls, credit card transactions. We did walkthroughs of bank recs, scale house, cash receipts, fixed assets. So we did a lot of control testing and walkthroughs. And again, I really think it's commendable that you got away without, any findings. Pretty incredible. So I'm happy to report that, as well as we look at the permits and compliance requirements for the JPA. So all of that was well recorded and done. And I think, unless Sukdev has something else, he's shaking his head, that
I just want to thank everybody. That's
okay.
all.
He just also wants to thank everybody for their assistance during this difficult time, different time, and different procedures that we had to do, but able to complete it. Any questions for us at this point?
Well, thank you first off, Patricia and team. This must have been, you talk about an unusual audit in terms of doing it virtually. I have an important question. What kind of boat is that behind you?
Oh, I don't know, but it is a sailboat.
It's a sailboat.
It's through turbulent waters.
Yeah.
But it eventually makes it to shore.
I caught my eye on it, so I pinned your video so I could see it. It's a sloop, and it's I grew up sailing and still go sailing on a gaff rig schooner. Anyways, that's a neat boat.
That's fantastic. We've done catamaran sailing in our younger days, but I've given it up.
Well, I would say the sign of a successful report is when that's my first question and not something else. It is neat to see, and I'm glad you pointed out that net position, because for the last several years, as we've seen that go up, literally we've now created a U. In those years, as we saw it building up, and we hoped it would continue, but there's things within our control and there's things not within our control. And so it is neat to see that net position. And I do wonder, as a solid waste industry, Patricia, whether it's you, Patrick, Ray, just to kind of give some perspective about any trends that we're seeing in net position in our industry. How do we relate to other solid waste authorities? Just, I don't know, any comparisons that any of you can do as it relates to the net position specifically.
I'll let Patrick, because I know he likes to study other financials a little more than I do, but I will say that Monterey Regional, for one, is taking out a lot of debt in recent years, so their debt position has decreased, but I'll let Patrick speak on it.
You're muted, Patrick.
I think that's well stated from Ray. It really depends on the agency's sort of risk position, how much risk they want to take. Because obviously, when you're looking at installing large MRFs and agency owned, public or privately owned materials recovery operations, there is a bigger risk, and you're taking that risk, and it does require an upfront investment that has the potential to lower your net position. And I think one of the things I study pretty frequently across the state, and not just within the industry, but other agencies, cities, counties, state governments, is really the pension. It's the challenge we all know of pensions. And some states, some counties, some cities, and agencies like ours have done a better job, and others have done not as good. Sort of deferred those decisions to pay those unfunded liabilities. And as they accrue, I think one of the things Ray and I talk about a lot is, looking at a budget from a cash flow perspective versus an accrual perspective. And we have, Ray and I have talked a lot, and as you've seen, we focused a lot on looking at the accrual side of this and making sure when we have the excess monies, when we have a good year, we don't use that to necessarily expand a program, maybe a little bit, but not all of it, but instead use that to keep those accrued liabilities from growing. And as Ray sort of spoke to in his opening statements, we're going to be coming back to the board next month with, even though it's not a massive fund balance, $3.8 million is a good working amount for us to begin to look at some of the other accrued liabilities we have and to begin to bring those down. So I guess your answer to your question was simply is it's all over the board, and it really depends on your risk position. This agency, as we've looked at things like new technologies, we've been more focused on looking at private partnerships where the private sector takes the risk and we're just paying a fee for the service. Things like when we looked at conversion technologies and the GOE facility, all those projects are sort of focused on reducing the potential for accruing additional liabilities and just focusing on the core, putting our money back into the core part of our business. The compost operation is one of them. So hope that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think, specifically as it relates to the authority, there's a few reasons why we saw that net position go down. And then there's some solid reasons of why we saw it go up. And I mean, perhaps this is an oversimplification in a way, but it was debt is not necessarily a bad thing, of course. I mean, it can be bad, it can be good. And if you can translate and transfer debt into an asset, and that's, again, oversimplifying things a bit, but that's essentially what we've done, right?
Yes.
That's basically what it is. I mean, if you're going to take out debt, you want your assets to last longer than the debt. So if you're going to take out debt for something, you want take out debt for an asset that's going to outlive that debt, so that your position can improve over time, as opposed to using debt for short-term gains. And strategically, all debt debt does have a good purpose. When we needed cash to take over Johnson Canyon, short-term debts for that. And obviously, even the bonds that when they were taken out, those sites did need to be remediated. There was no getting around it. But I privately tell Patrick that if I never have to issue debt, as long as I'm finance manager, I'll be perfectly happy. So I prefer to try to, set money aside and pay as we go and kind of build up those fund balances if we know something's coming.
Yeah. One other comment, and then I'll open it up to board discussion.
I would just ask, can I add one thing?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, please. Yeah.
So one of the things we are seeing, and it follows what Patrick was saying, is the management of the pension liability. We're really seeing that the agencies that are doing that are in a much better position. But for this particular agency in the older years, there was, the assets were just being depleted in much faster, right, than the debt, right? So it caused this problem. As you started to pay the debt down, we start to see that turnaround happen. So, I mean, it was just a matter of timing some of it. And a lot of it also has to do with those estimates that I was talking about with closure and post-closure. They really swing your liabilities. So those, taken into account can make a big difference.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, so one other comment before I go to committee discussion. I'll probably, like Ray, when you gave that breakdown, what was it, the Brian's layman's terms, when that comes to the full board, I will pause there. I'll try to remember to pause there to ask for questions from the board, because you know how these things go. It's these reports come to us, and it's easy for us to go nod our heads and go, yeah, mm-hmm. But some of those components are really key to understanding not only the historical decisions that we've made, but to use them as a guideline and guidance for making decisions in the future. So I think it'll be important for us to spend a little bit of time on that item.
I thank you. And I'll actually, just thinking about it, but we'll go ahead and set up our assets the same way, like the 17 million net position. This was just me and Brian having a conversation this morning and me deciding that it was extremely valuable and wanted the EC to see it. So
I appreciate that. Okay, let's go to committee discussion now. Gloria, any questions or comments?
My comments is good job. Thank you, Ray, and the whole staff. It's really, Patricia, it's nice seeing you again. And yeah, and it's always, you know, I'm retiring, Patricia, after 22 years. And every year that I've been here and you've done the audit, it's always has been a big pleasure to hear that. You
Congratulations.
know, we have a good audit, you know, and again, it's thank you to our staff that's so knowledgeable and really, you know, looks after the money and how we spend it. So again, thank you so much. And Ray and your entire staff doing a good job.
thank you, Gloria. I do have to defer some of that kudos to Caesar and his staff also, that you know they do a very good job at running as lean as they can to ensure that they're always meeting those budgets and not spending more than we have. So
the entire staff.
Okay, and Chris, any comments or questions on this item?
No questions, just a couple quick comments. You know, I deal with a lot of financials. I think I currently sit on about 28 different boards, and most of those require audited financials. And going through these, it really is crystal clear where our assets are, where our liabilities are. And the thing that springs out to me when I look at this report, and it jumped right out at me, was the great fiscal management. And I see that as a combination of the boards that have come before me. Obviously, I'm new to this board, newer, and also the great leadership from staff to help keep us within these parameters that we're lucky enough to look at today and say, clean audit, looks great, thank you. And so I want to again sing that praise, not just to staff, but also to the board members. I know we're going to have more turnover this year, including you, Gloria. Thank you for all that you've committed to this group to help keep us on the right track. And Rob, as president, and obviously your financial background, you've done an incredible job working with staff to keep us on this great track. I think the one request that I have is moving forward. I know that we do have a lot of younger or newer representatives from different cities, perhaps just a little more. And again, for the benefit of those folks who don't have the opportunity to look at so many audited financial reports every single year, to give them that experience dealing with them and understanding what the different definitions are and what a clean audit means, you know, the lack of comments and why that's a good thing. Just some of that basic breakdown. And I'm looking at what's happening with members who are currently on our board. I think we'll have to do the same again next year, and hopefully we'll have a strong foundation from there moving forward. But just kind of wanted to throw that out there as a recommendation from me as a member of EC moving forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very good, thank you, Chris. Okay, is there any public comment on this item? Brian Fruss, you are our public online. So if you would like to comment on this item, please click the raise hand button. Anyone who's dialed in, you would do *9 to raise your hand to provide any comments on this item. And seeing none, then this is also on for forward to the board and recommend approval, and I'll entertain that motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
We have a first by Gloria, second by Chris, and if we could do a roll call vote, please.
For Vice President De La Rosa,
Yes.
alternate Vice President Lopez,
Yes.
and President Coleman.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you again, Patricia and your team. Thank you, Ray and your team. And Patricia, we'll see you again in a few weeks, a couple weeks, or however the dates fall.
I will be there.
All
Have a
right.
good evening. Thank you very much. I'm leaving.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you,
Okay,
Patricia.
we'll go to item number 4, which is an opportunity for regional franchise procurement information. This is Patrick's chance to see how well I was paying attention when we provided this to the advisory committee the other day, and to see if I could do the presentation instead, which I'm not going to even attempt. So I'll turn it over to Patrick.
All right. So if you go to the next slide, please. I'll sort of start here with the background. So as you all know, franchises are probably one of the single largest contract that a jurisdiction signs in terms of its complete and total dollar value. Very often it's number 1, but it's always in the top 2 or 3 in terms of its net value and its impact to the community. And so it's really important to sort of look at what our options are. And the reason we're bringing this forward is as of Tuesday, with the county extending their franchise agreement with Waste Management, we have a one-time unique opportunity to again look at what do we want to do in 2025? Because all of our member agency agreements are now all co-terminating on the same date, June 30th, 2025. Now that sounds like a long time out, but in the process for procuring franchises and deciding if you want to do it, if you want to extend, there's a lot of different options we'll go through in a few minutes. But the idea is this opportunity only comes around every 10 years. We had this alignment in 2010 and again in 2012 with the option of at least some of the agencies having the ability to potentially conjoin, benefit from economies of scale and do new procurements. But because of this extremely unique situation where we'd actually gotten all of the city agencies to co-terminate a few years ago, and everybody extended their agreements to the state, having the county add into that now adds an added element of opportunity for the entire county, or at least our region and the unincorporated county. So we started out with a brief presentation, or brief discussion, I should say, with the Salinas Valley City Managers Group that has been inviting me into their meetings periodically. And last meeting was the beginning of September. And primarily the first focus, obviously, was they were very interested in trying to, provide some input and guidance in helping solve the issue with the Salinas potential withdrawal. But it was an opportunity to talk about other things like 1383 rules and regulations and changes coming. Also as an opportunity to bring this topic forward. So at that meeting, we brought this topic up and began to have just a 50,000 foot discussion about this. And the managers were very interested in this. Unfortunately, Mr. Corpus was at the last minute was unable to attend the meeting. So it's primarily just the South Valley City managers, but we do want to continue this conversation going forward and consider these opportunities. So they've asked that I present, again, prepare a presentation. The advisory committee's seen it, you're seeing it today. We're scheduled to meet with them again Tuesday of next week to do this formal presentation. Mandy doesn't know this yet, but I've invited her to also present on some new changes in SB 1383 compliance coming down from CalRecycle. That is going to be extremely challenging. And we don't know why they're doing it because it doesn't make any sense right now with the pandemic. But it's happening and we have no choice but to get all hands on board to deal with some new issues around not necessarily 1383, but SAB 1826, which is the mandatory organics collection program. So I don't want to get off on tangent too much, but just to say we're going to be doing having a couple of discussions at that meeting, and this will be one of them. So I'll start by saying all of the agreements in our jurisdiction will be 25 years or older on June 2025. That's a very long time for agreements to be in place, even though they've been modified, amended, restated. The the baseline rates that were bid 25 years ago still remain the basis for the rates today, with adjustments that have been made over those years. The only exception, obviously, is the county's agreement that was bid and awarded in 2010. And with their 5-year extension, their contract will be 15 years old at the time of this co-termination. So the alignment of all these agreements offers just a one-time opportunity. And that benefit could be a benefit of economies of scale. If we look at consolidation of agreements, potentially, similar to what Tri-Cities does, there's 3 cities that all conjoin in one agreement. They benefit from that, but having more is even better. And so there's opportunities there to consider that, as has been done in many communities. Look at San Mateo County as a great example of a place where that's been done, and very successfully. It also gives you an opportunity to correct out of balance rates. We know that some of the franchise agreements have rates, and we'll talk about that in a second, that are really sort of out of balance with the market. They're out of balance with internally within their own rate structure, and there's a great variability. Procurement gives you the opportunity to rebalance your rate system to reflect reality, not only regulatory reality, but just the market realities. And so that's another opportunity. Allows us to readjust these agreements to make them all uniform. Uniformity of franchise services within a region is absolutely important. So that people move, for instance, just people moving from Gonzales to Salinas. They don't have to learn a new system, new set of rules. We're all operating the same type of system, which we are generally doing already, but there are still nuanced differences between communities. And I think the most important part is when you do a procurement, it opens up the door for a lot of great new ideas from the public and from your bidders. The bidders come in, they have new ideas that you may have not thought about before. It's a chance to engage the public and find out what they want from services, what they like, what they don't like. So there's a lot of opportunities. Next slide, please. So this was just a sample of some of the more common services across our 4 franchise areas: King City, the county, both run by Waste Management, Tri-Cities Disposal for Soledad, Greenfield, and Gonzales, and then Republic Services for Salinas. So you can see there is a lot of variability here. And some of this is really due to, not because the programs are different, because really all the services are generally similar. But because of the time period, how long it's been since they've been competitively bid, things have changed over time. CPIs are a little different from one vendor to another and how that's calculated. Additions have been made, issues around bad debt may have been added in. And so what it's created is sort of a market that if someone looking at this would say, well, geez, I don't know what this means. Why is one company paying X dollars and another company's paying almost twice as much? Why is services changed differently as they get to be larger garbage services than smaller? And so there's just, recycling services. Some haulers, it's included in the service cost, it's unlimited. Others charge for it. Some have minimal baseline. It's just very, there is a lot of difference here that some of it may explain these rate differences. But at the end of the day, there are some challenges with the existing structures that are very old. Next slide, please. So I'm trying to break this down into really the 5 options. And I'll say this sort of in a uniform way. These are options that everybody could use, individual cities could use, smaller groups of cities like the Tri-Cities could do. These are options that are available to everybody, independently or in groups. And so this is not a recommendation today. It's just these are ideas to think about. Because if we're going to do procurement, as we'll see at the end, this is the time to start the discussion. If there's going to be procurements, it's a long process from start to finish, and we want to make sure you're not rushing it at the end, because that is the biggest mistake we can make. So the first is a consolidated agreement. Simply said, this would be all the cities in the county, or all the cities, for instance, if the county didn't want to do this, bidding one singular regional franchise agreement, where everybody gets the same services, and there may be rate differentials depending on how this is structured, but there's a lot of hybrids in here, so I don't want to get into too many hybrids, but a consolidated agreement. And of course, the authority was set up within its JPA to consider that. If the member agencies wanted that, the authority could be the administrator and the holder of that contract and have one large regional contract. And that, again, San Mateo County, there's a few others that have done this very successfully with their regional solid waste agency. The second is just collective bidding of uniform agreements. And I'll keep emphasizing the issue of uniform agreements. The state has issued a template agreement, and it's part of the 1383 work that really is it's a possibility. Mandy and I have not looked through the whole agreement yet. It's very long and wieldy, like most agreements are. But at least it's a starting point to look at. Here's an agreement that's already been vetted by the state as meeting all the 1383, 1826, 341, 939 requirements. And so we have templates. And so uniformity is important so that everybody's getting the same basic services. And so collectively bidding means individual agencies or smaller groups of agencies can collectively bid, very similar to what we have now. But again, do a procurement to see if you can get a better market rate or get different types of interest in your services. Those collective agreements, again, could be held by the individual agencies as they are today, or they could be held by the authority under the structure of the JPA if so desired. The third option is status quo bidding of individual agreements. Basically, this would, again, using uniform agreements, each individual agency would have its own independent bid. And we'll talk about the pros and cons in a second. But it'd be like Salinas goes out and bids their own contract and makes their own decision. They hold the agreement, and that will just be sort of a status quo process. The fourth option, which we've been using for many years, is simply negotiating extensions. You're happy with your hauler, you keep extending their agreement, negotiate the best terms and conditions you can get. Maybe you can get rate adjustments. That's probably pretty unlikely based on the trajectory we've seen in all the franchise agreements in the county over the last decade. You'll get reductions, but you can negotiate add-ons and better terms and conditions. And the strange one came out of our advisory committee this week. I had thought about it, but never thought that it would be something people would be interested in, but they felt strongly enough to say, well, you should probably put that on the table. That's municipal collection. That would be a city or a county deciding, hey, we're gonna do our own collection. A couple of local agencies that do that: City of Santa Cruz, City of Watsonville, do municipal collection. They don't hire a franchise. And again, pros and cons with all these approaches. We'll go through those in just a second. Okay, next slide, please. Go ahead and just bring all the bullets up, please. Yeah. So this is just the section out of the franchise. It would be related to consolidated franchising or collective franchising. The authority could hold a collection agreement on behalf of a member agency, again, if you so desired. Next, please. So the pros and cons of a consolidated franchise, it's a single agreement, much easier to administer in the sense that, you got one set of conditions and one agency overseeing the entire activity. And you got an agency with almost 100 years of management experience. So you've got the right people to do that if that was a desire. Obviously, it reduces procurement costs. You're doing one RFP, one selection process, one set of negotiations. So it simplifies it for the region, for the authority district. It reduces administrative burden on the cities because that burden would fall on the authority. Typically under these types of structures, it's not you're going to give it all and we're just going to take care of it for you. That's not how it works. The agency holds it, administers it, but there's typically an oversight advisory committee made up of senior folks from each of the member agencies to provide oversight and guidance on the administration of the agreement. So it's not just the authority holds it, but there is an oversight committee that typically comes with that structure. Allows for uniformity of service, and the bottom line is this is the option that gives you the best economies of scale potentially for the lowest rates or the most secured rates. And you would see that with these types of larger regional procurements, because you'll get a lot more interest, because this would be a valuable enough contract to get others interested in the procurement. Next slide, please. Collective franchise service procurement. Again, same thing. This is very similar to what the district did for their member agencies about 5 years ago. They went out, again, uniform agreement. They did one procurement process, but the outcome was to negotiate and execute individual agreements for each member agency. So they saved money on procurement by doing a singular procurement for everybody. But there's a little more work and effort, because you got to now negotiate an individual agreement. So their rates are different. Between Carmel pays a different rate than Marina. Some of it's proximity to landfill. Some of it has to do with what we call boutique services, things that one city may want in their service. It's different from the baseline agreement. Again, this oversight can be done in-house with the existing jurisdictional agency as the current practice. Under this structure, those agreements, some or all, could be put under the authority. It would be up to each individual agency. Again, uniformity across jurisdiction and independent coordination of regulatory mandates, which again puts each one of the jurisdictions on that hotspot. Collective procurement, definitely there's potential, again, still for some economies of scale and better rates, probably not as much as a collective agreement or as a consolidated agreement. Okay, next, please. Status quo service procurement. This is just everybody doing their own thing, and that's perfectly fine too. You're bidding independently. The procurement costs go up now because each one of you has that cost that you have to bear, whether it's having the authority do it or a consultant. There's definitely just a lot more work involved in individual procurements. Oversight is usually in this case, the oversight would be through the jurisdiction itself, though it could still be through the authority if someone desired that. Again, we're focusing on uniformity, but this again puts independent coordination of regulatory mandates on the back of the jurisdiction. Unlikely that you'll see a significant benefit in economies of scale under this type of a structure. So you could expect to see rates somewhere in the range of what you're seeing today. But the market may tell you something different in the bid, but you're not going to get economies of scale with this structure. Next slide, please. And of course, the status quo, which is really everybody's been doing, is just extending current agreements. The old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's totally valid, and if you're happy, and you can move forward with your own independent negotiations and extensions. Again, you're independently responsible now for all those regulatory mandates, but a lot of, again, independent negotiation for each agreement that's required, and unlikely you're going to see a lot of rate benefit in that type of structure, because you'll be working off of what you currently have. Next slide, please. And then municipal collection service, sort of the interesting one in the mix. That's converting a private to a public collection service. It's a heavy lift. It's going to require something like that. If you're interested, it will require a lot of upfront work. You really want to consider this, because it's a huge capital investment upfront. A lot of long range expenses. You'll have to make sure you rate set appropriately. Likely would require us to get a consultant in to really help evaluate the feasibility. But of course, the feasibility, if there was an interest by any one of the member agencies to do this, you could do a feasibility study in parallel with your procurement or your extension negotiation And at the end of the day, you're basically bidding against the private sector. What can you do it for? You know, consultant's going to tell you this is what's going to cost, what your rates need to be if you do it, you know, capital included. And this is what the market's telling you based on a procurement or a negotiated extension. Again, you know, just gives you information to make a better informed decision at the end of the process. Next slide, please. This is really the final slide, and this is the procurement timeline. So if any of you are interested in doing a procurement, and this is a very rough 30,000 foot timeline, but it is, we're working back from July 2024. So the goal whenever you do a procurement is that you really want to be having your decision made, if at all possible, 1 year before the new vendor takes over. If there's a new vendor, you always assume that in a procurement, it may not be the existing incumbent vendor that already has their courtyard and everything established. So you make the assumption that it could be someone new and that they're going to need some time to set up. And so you really want to try to have your procurement completed and agreements awarded 1 year before the current agreements expire. So we start with July 2024 as sort of our goal. And so, you know, this discussion is the start of the first action, which is really, are member agencies interested in this in any way, shape, or form? Because you can all choose to do everything together, apart, independently. These are all your, you know, basically your basic options for what do you do with your agreements in 5 years? And you really should be having those, starting to have those discussions now. And so we figure that's going to be at least a 12-month process to get through those discussions and decisions. And then the next, obviously, is hiring a consultant to assist with procurement, setting up your RFPs. You know, it takes a few months to hire a consultant. And preparing those RFPs, preparing the draft documents, the draft franchise agreements. That takes time, takes a lot of internal review, a lot of staff time, legal time. That's going to take you some months. An RFP process typically is going to take you 4 to 6 months from start to finish, because these are complex. RFPs are very complex for garbage contracts. It takes a lot of analytics at the end to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. I've been through several of these on my own, and I've also been on panels for other agencies. So I've been through enough of these to know this is a pretty realistic timeline. Then you got to make the selection, and that can go right away. It can be like a 1 month thing where everybody goes, hey, this is it. It's one company rose to the top, or it can get very political, and there can be a lot of favorites and a lot of back and forth discussions. And so it can take really up to 6 months to sort of get to that final agreement. And then the award, you know, getting it in front of the public and individual councils can take a few months as well. So this sort of just looks generally at the procurement timeline, assuming we start having substantive discussions, you know, this month. This sort of is what the timeline would look like. So I think the last piece of this is, you can just go to the next, actually just leave it here, it's in the last slide. I think it's just really how much involvement do you want of your staff and your public? What I've found in my years of working through these types of processes, public involvement is really important. You don't want to tell the public, hey, by the way, you know, we're going to award this contract, or you know, we're going to extend this contract, without having at least some discourse with the public so they understand what your intents are, and you can get feedback, because the feedback is really important for anything we do with a contract. Making sure that everybody's happy with the service. Maybe there's something the public wants that's different. You know, having those new ideas can really create a better system. Whether you're extending your agreement and then talking to the public about what that means, or whether you're going through a full-blown procurement, having the public at the table during that process is absolutely important and critical, both in designing the system you want to meet the public need, and also in making that selection process. Those are both really important components of this. Because if you don't do it, sometimes this comes back and bite you. I've seen that in a couple of agencies that I've sat on panels with before, where didn't get the public involved early enough, and there was some traps in there that ended up causing a lot of headache during the final selection process. So with that, I'll just open it up for comments and questions.
So thank you, Patrick. So let me start with this. This is on for informational only. Is
Yes.
the intent, was your intent to get the EC's feedback and then to decide whether or not we have a full board discussion?
Yes, I'd like to know, one, if there's feedback, was this clear? Does everybody sort of understand where we are in the process, and are there things you think need to be clarified on this? Because I'll be again testing this presentation with the 5 city managers next week and getting their feedback as well, because I think at the end of the day, I think it's helpful for the board to see this. If only because we have every jurisdiction there, and they sort of understand what a franchise, what's going to happen at the end of your current agreements. You've got to think about that today, not wait until 2025 to think about it. Because if you do want to do something like a procurement, it takes a lot of time. It really does, and a lot of planning. So
yeah, it does. And I remember now many years ago, you and I talking about it, and I remember you prefacing it with the same thing of it's going to be here before you know it. 5 years sounds like a lot, but with all these steps, it takes a long time. So my perspective on this, I'm definitely supportive. We need to have this discussion, and I'm glad that it's at the city manager level right now for discussion. I definitely think having this come to the full board would be a good thing to prep them for thinking about the process, and then having the city managers continue to work on this. This has to be city manager driven in many ways, with the support of the respective governing bodies, but without support from the city managers, there's really no good in this. So my suggestion would be to have this presentation at whatever, if you're thinking this coming board meeting or November board meeting, whatever the timeline is to have it be presented as kind of a prep to get them thinking about it, and then continue the discussions at the city manager level. I think the presentation is clear. It clearly has a lot of information, but I appreciate all the options on there. It is interesting, that last option that was brought up. It's intriguing, of course. It's highly complex, as we all can imagine, but it's one of the options, so it should be on the table. So Gloria, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a lot, and I mean a lot of information. It's good information, but just like you're saying, Rob, yeah, we're in the process of hiring a new city manager, and we have our acting city manager right now, Jen Pia, and so yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I need to take this back. Brian, are you still on there? Brian's still on there. Yeah, we need to take all this back and yeah, they need to look at all this information and see what Salinas is going to do. And so I will talk to Jim tomorrow, because you said there's a meeting next week with the city managers, Patrick?
Yeah, I was just invited. Both Mandy will be talking about the 1826 changes. Next Tuesday. So Jim was copied on the invitation, and
okay. All right.
Gloria, has a timeline been set on the potential timeline for hiring a new city manager?
We're hoping. Right now we're in the process. We did community outreach on what kind of a city manager would you like to see. We did a survey, we did some phone calls, and now we have a committee that's formed, and we're in those steps. Hopefully we will make a decision by the end of November.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
All right, let's, before we go to public
Moving
comment,
quickly, Rob, we're moving as quickly as we can.
yeah. Quickly while balancing the time
Right,
that it takes.
right,
Yeah, it's
right.
got to be a deliberate process. Before we
Exactly.
go to public comment, let's continue on with the committee discussion. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
So I'm supportive of this going forward and continuing the conversation. I know it's not a new conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of strategy that's gone in over the years to put us in a position where this is an option. I think my only comment is the presentation was a little long, and I know that perhaps getting it a little more concise would be helpful in terms of getting to a conversation with city managers. I know this content is important, but kind of letting them lead with their questions rather than just the full extent and breadth of it might be more helpful. Just knowing who city managers are and what they try to do with their time. So that's my only comment overall, but I do think it's extremely helpful content that should be provided to every city manager in preparation of or at least setting perhaps some joint expectations and understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and what the common goals that could be achieved regardless of what authority somebody's under or where they are at the time. This is an opportunity that's coming towards us and we need to capitalize on it if it's something that we all see the joint benefit in.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Chris. And I have some thoughts related to strategy and some of those things that you just mentioned. I'm going to hold off until we go out to public comment now. So let's start with Brian Fruss. I see your raised hand, and let's go ahead and hear from Brian there. So you are now a participant, and you should be able to unmute yourself, I believe, and then speak.
Okay. Can you hear me okay then?
Yeah,
Yes.
we sure can.
Okay, great. So I just had a couple questions. Patrick, on your slide, the sample rate comparison, do you know that on the commercial rates, looks like you're saying you include baseline recycling capacity with added charge for increase. Okay, so that basically answers my first question. But the second one then is an observation. You mentioned that recycling services and added charges are not to exceed 50%. Actually, currently within the city, they're 75%.
Really? Oh, I must have missed that amendment because it was the version I have. It says 50%. So
yeah, that's within the last. I thought you may not have been aware. It's in the last, I would say last 6 months. I think that happened. And then the other one is I was trying to confirm while we were talking here. I think that our rates, I think the 2676, that looks like last year's rates. I think we're up coming close to 30 now, but I was going to confirm that in a second here. But anyway, I just wanted to point out, if if you're going to present this information, just some corrections there.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll try to pull those up. We may have been looking at the wrong rate sheet since this year we weren't involved in rate setting. So.
And so then lastly is just as Gloria pointed out with the new city managers, Ray, David, myself, and our consultant, we were all aware of this and the alignment of different contracts. But with the new city manager, we have to convene internally before we'd have anything else to say, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for us, Brian?
No, thank you. Thank you.
And thank you. I appreciate you catching those items. Okay. So for anyone else, members of the public, if you're on the phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand, and then we'll call upon you if you do that *9. So part of the reason why I was asking about the timeline for the city manager is, to Chris's point, yes, it's a lot of information, it's a lot of options, and one of the potentials is that we hold off, whether it's the November board meeting or I don't want to wait too long. But one of the things that would be nice is if when it's presented to the board, it's shown, hey, here's the 5 potential options. Here's the quick overview of it. And then based on feedback from the city managers, they are asking us to focus on I mean, I would imagine they would probably bring it down to 2 or 3 options that they see as viable. So instead of us thinking about all 5 options, is to, with the assistance of the city managers, of narrowing it down.
Yeah, and I think I probably wasn't clear at the beginning of this. The meeting with the city managers next week will actually sort of drive this. If they think this is all crazy, or they have very rigid ideas of what they want to do, I'll use my discretion to whether I bring it back in October or November.
Yeah.
I think it needs to come back, but that's, I wanted you guys to sort of just give me some first blush feedback, and then we'll have that bigger conversation with the city managers next week. And if they're okay with it, we can bring it back as it is, or I think that's a great suggestion. If they want us to focus on 2 or 3, that's what we'll do. This is really just information to get people thinking.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good to me. I like that. Any other last comments, Gloria or Chris?
I had one more person that wanted to make public comment, so I'm just sharing him on the screen now. He doesn't have a lot of words. I don't know if you guys can see him, but he thanks you for all your efforts.
I got to make that video bigger. Oh, that's awesome.
That's all. Thank you.
Oh, I love it. Hey man, and that's the future, all these things that were these decisions, we have to have that within that context of the future. That's cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Chris. I appreciate that. All right. Let's see.
5.
Brian, you got your hand raised again, I think, or maybe it just is still raised. I wonder, can we move him into, did he just raise his hand again? Or did
he did, and I just moved him over to,
because I wonder maybe he got the information.
If I did, I just wanted to add a comment. And
yeah,
Patrick, my apologies. We are at 26. You have the rates correct, but the 75% is the only correction then that I see. So sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you for letting us know that we'll fix the one error in there.
All right. All good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Brian. Okay, Patrick, do you need any other direction from us?
Nope. I'll just keep you informed after we've had some discussions with I'll bring the EC back up to speed. If we don't bring this back in October, I'll bring the EC up to speed on this in November.
Very good. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to item 5. It's the update on the Sun Street Transfer Station relocation project and the City of Salinas 1-year notice of intent to withdraw from the joint powers agreement with the Salinas Valley Solid Waste Authority. And I'm going to grab my notes here, and I will keep the comments fairly short because quite a number of us on the call today were a part of that meeting or have been briefed by Patrick by now, I'm sure. So I'm going to keep some of my comments short, and then I'll elaborate more at our full board meeting, both because many of us already have the information, but also because we have another meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And so there's various meetings going on, so that will be helpful. But for the benefit of anyone that might be listening on YouTube or the phone, or others that don't have the information, we had a meeting between the Solid Waste Authority, Staff Exec Board, and City of Salinas reps last week, and it was a very fruitful meeting. I was really appreciative of what we were able to discuss and accomplish in a short period. I mean, it was 1 hour. And to me, the most important thing that came out of it was the joint willingness and eagerness to resume this conversation. The conversation got derailed for obvious reasons, but to state the obvious, with the passing of Mayor Gunter and the announcement of the retirement of City Manager Ray Corpus, and you throw in there coronavirus and fires and all that kind of stuff, really derailed our conversation for valid reasons. So it was nice to resume it, and it was nice to have folks at the table that have a willingness to address these issues. So that's the overarching thing is the most important. Within that, I thought it was very helpful that we had a discussion surrounding the priorities as we address it in our little subcommittee meeting, if you will. As we address it, we knew we needed to hit them in priority order. So I do want to spend a minute kind of going over those priorities, so we have that full transparency, and then I'll elaborate a little bit more at our full board meeting. So priority 1 relates to negotiations with Republic on the Madison Lane area there. So that's priority 1. Priority 2 is the looking at potential other locations, and with the help of the City of Salinas primarily, is identifying other potential locations. And obviously closely related to that, priority 3 is leaving Sun Street, and with a timeline and a commitment to leaving Sun Street. Number 4 is removing the notice of intent to withdraw, which Christy Cromini's made it quite clear that the condition upon which the City of Salinas would feel comfortable having a discussion on removing or rescinding that notice of intent to withdraw is the authority's establishment of a timeline and a plan to leave Sun Street. And then priority number 5 is reviewing the governance of the authority. And so those are the priorities. So that was the gist of our conversation. We'll have another meeting at 2 o'clock tomorrow, and then we'll be reporting out at the full board meeting. So I think for now, I think that's really the most pertinent things to report out. I do want to give Patrick an opportunity. Is there anything that you want to add on this agenda item, Patrick?
Yeah, I want to, so as you know, we actually, the staff had a meeting yesterday, so led by interim city manager Jim Pia. And I can't be more thrilled because Jim and I go back a long time in looking and working on this specifically back in the early 2000 or 2010s. And so, you know, Jim's I'm just really thankful to have him at the table because it was a very small meeting between Jim, myself, Luis Quinones with the new general manager with Republic, and Dave Jacobs with the city. And I thought it was a very fruitful meeting. Jim really is trying, and I think he and I both have the same philosophical approach to this, is while he's only interim, you know, and this is a short period of time, everybody's collective goal out of that meeting was simply to let's move this forward and let's be on the right track before the city's big transition happens at the beginning of next year. Let's just be doing this. Let's not put this on the plate for the new elected officials, the new city manager. So we'll talk a little bit more about it yesterday, but I think it's just a very fruitful discussion, very honest discussion. A few hard questions from all of us, you know, to each other about, you know, wants, desires, needs, obstacles, you know, points of collaboration. So I think it was a great start. So I'm hopeful that with Jim's leadership on this, that we can be on the right track before the first. We may not have an answer, but we'll be on a track that everybody is behind and supporting. So.
Good.
Okay, good. Let's, Gloria, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm very happy to hear that, Patrick. I'm so glad to hear that. Yes, Jim is going to move forward.
Chris, any comments or questions?
No, just a brief comment that we did agree to also keep it sort of three-way conversation with myself representing the county as part of those. As the conversation rolls on, we want to make sure all partners continue to have a seat at the table.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and then public comment. Looks like we don't have any public on our Zoom. Oh no, oh, Brian's still here. So Brian, if you want to comment on this, raise your hand. If anyone's on the phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. And seeing none, then we will go to the future agenda items.
All right. Well, the only item that's might potentially be different is, again, bringing back the discussion on the franchise procurement options. We'll add that on to the look ahead for next month or this month or November, based on the feedback from the city managers next week. So outside of that, we'll be same discussions. We'll be going in closed session tonight. Obviously, it's that time of year for the GM's evaluation and nominating officers next month. So that'll probably something I think that might be a good conversation for the executive committee next month in terms of process, since Mayor Cullen will be, President Cullen will be dropping off to past president. Gloria, you'll be stepping down to enjoy your life a different way. And so I think, there'll be some interesting transitions with at least two new executive committee members that will have to come on to the executive committee, and how that rotation works. Because this is a little different than any circumstance we've had in the past in terms of how the rotation works. But based on past practice and the current structure of the rotation, it would be a South County rep would move into, I think, the vice president role, and a Salinas rep would move into the alternate. But I think that's a point for discussion at the meeting. So we'll bring that up in the November's executive committee discussion.
That's what the officers nominating committee, that's the hard work they get to do.
Yeah, well, it's just, this is a different circumstance than we've had before. So I think it's worthy of some discussion over how does that rotation happen, assuming Chris wants to move up to president. So.
President Lopez, I like the ring of that.
Got a nice ring to it. Thank you.
Well, he's gonna need next year when he's not chairman of the board. So
yeah, it's called recovery, Patrick. Recovery.
What do you have to recover?
We'll try not to make it as hard for you. All right, that's what I have on the look ahead. If there's anything you want to add, subtract, or modify, please, it's a good time to let me know.
All right, Gloria, Chris, any questions or feedback on a calendar?
No, none.
I'm good.
All right. Okay, so we're going to go into closed session. There's 2 items on closed session. Can we put those on the screen there? The closed session agenda items.
We have nothing to discuss under real property.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're not going to go into closed session on item 7, but we will go into closed session on item 8, which is pursuant to Government Code Section 54957B, to consider the performance evaluation of the General Manager, Chief Administrative Officer Patrick Matthews for 2020. Just so I'm clear, so I communicate this out to the public correctly, we're going to be exiting this meeting, going into a separate Zoom session for that, and then we're going to be coming back into this Zoom session to adjourn, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so, this Zoom meeting will stay live, but not with us in it.
Okay. So
we will. And just so for reference, at 10:38 this morning, you got the alternate Zoom information sent to the board members and council.
Yeah, so there's 2 things that we're going to do before we go into closed session. First is we need to give an opportunity if the public has input on the closed session item. Please, if you're dialed in, do *9. If you're on Zoom, raise your hand. So that's the first thing. And the second is, I just want to make sure, Gloria and Chris, you both have the link for our closed session.
Yeah, from Ray. That's the link from Ray, right? Yeah. I have it.
Okay, great. So at this point in time, to the public, the exec board and Patrick, we're going to be exiting out of the session, but if you want to stay on it, please do so. We will be coming back into it. So we will now adjourn to closed session. Okay, we are back. Make sure everyone's here. Yes, we are all here. Okay. And you guys can hear me, right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we are adjourned. We are adjourned out of closed session. That we have nothing to report out of closed session. And hey, whoa, oh, Roy's not on here. I was going to ask him if he wants us to do a motion to adjourn, but I'm just going to use my presidential powers because I'm not going to have him very long. And I'm going to adjourn this meeting at whatever time it is.
5:41.
Are you willing to commit to a peaceful transition? Roy is over on the attendee side, so you may want to bring him over.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes. And I, oh gosh, and I want to make a joke about white supremacy, but I will bite my tongue.
And you don't want to pack the board, right? With King City representatives?
Oh, thank you guys.
Okay, we need to adjourn this meeting right now. All right.
All right.
Sorry about that. I was trying to respond to you, Rob. I'm like, I'm here. I swear.
Wait, Roy, how's it go these days? Do you want us to do an motion to adjourn, or can I just adjourn the meeting?
Your preference as
Okay.
president.
Okay, then my preference is to say that I am adjourning the meeting at 5:42. Take care, everyone, and we will see you soon.
All right. See you in a
Stay
couple weeks.
safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.